The black man had committed a minor parking violation, a fleeting inconvenience, but that alone was enough to make him the target of an annoyed patrol officer. The man tried to cooperate, offering to fix the car's position immediately, but instead of professionalism, he received an arrogant attitude, prying questions, and a flat refusal. When the man pointed out that the police officer's behavior was inappropriate and beyond his authority, blind rage set in. The man had to stand and listen to demeaning words, vicious insults directed at his skin color, words that no one should have to hear, especially from a representative of the law. And then just because he dared to speak up to protect himself, just because he did not silently endure injustice, that man was handcuffed. He was treated roughly. His hands were locked behind his back like a criminal, right in the middle of a crowded street in front of curious and whispering eyes. Passers-by stopped and stared, some shaking their heads in disgust, while others recorded the incident on their phones, capturing every second of this blatant abuse of power. The policeman was pleased, thinking that he had taught him a lesson in being reasonable, but he had made an unforeseen mistake, a mistake born of prejudice and blind abuse of power. He had no idea who he was messing with. He had no idea that this seemingly ordinary citizen was actually someone with influence and authority. He had no idea that his actions of illegally detaining and humiliating this man would have dire consequences for his own career. The wheel of fate was about to turn dramatically. The tables would soon be flipped. What happens next at the police station? What truth will come out, and what price will this police officer pay? Join us as we follow this tense story of prejudice, abuse of power, and an unexpected ending that reminds us all that justice, while sometimes delayed, is never truly denied. Early evening cast long shadows across the brick-paved streets of downtown Richmond, the autumn air carrying a slight chill that promised the coming winter. The street lamps were just beginning to flicker on, creating pools of warm light against the deepening blue of dusk. Marcus Daniels, a black man in his early 40s, was finishing up a long day at the district courthouse where he served as a federal judge, the prestigious position he'd worked toward his entire career against countless obstacles and barriers. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, custom-made by his father's old friend, a tailor who'd watched Marcus grow from a determined law student to one of the most respected legal minds in the state. His tie was loosened slightly after hours of intense hearings, his thoughtful face showing signs of fatigue from the complex cases he'd presided over, though his eyes remained sharp and observant as always. Throughout his 15-year legal career, Marcus had built a reputation for fairness and unwavering commitment to justice. His rulings, often cited in law schools as examples of careful judicial reasoning. He needed to stop by a small coffee shop just a few blocks away to meet a colleague who had some important case files to share before they both headed home to their families. Marcus was particularly eager to return to his brownstone where his wife Catherine, a pediatric surgeon, would be waiting along with their teenage daughter Zora, who had a debate tournament the following morning. Marcus drove his black BMW sedan, slowly navigating the narrow streets, searching for a parking spot in the already crowded downtown area. Finally, he found a small space between a fire hydrant and another parked car. Given the tight space and his exhaustion, Marcus attempted to parallel park, perhaps not as perfectly as he typically would. As he turned off the engine and stepped out, he noticed the rear of his car jutting out slightly from the permitted parking area, not blocking traffic, but certainly not within the lines precisely. He figured he would just grab the files and leave in less than 10 minutes. No harm done. He locked the car and prepared to walk away. At that moment, a police cruiser slowly rolled around the corner, the officer inside scanning the area with a look of bored authority. Officer Brad Miller, a white man in his mid-30s, with a military-style crew cut and muscular build who'd been on the force for 8 years, was patrolling alone. His mood already sour from an argument with his supervisor earlier that day, Miller had received multiple civilian complaints for excessive force and unprofessional conduct over the past year, but had always been protected by the thin blue line of silence that pervaded the department. His recent divorce had only worsened his temperament, making him increasingly bitter toward civilians, especially those he perceived as having an easier or more privileged life than his own. As he passed Marcus's car, he immediately noticed the parking violation, the rear tire slightly outside the designated space. This minor infraction, combined with the sight of a well-dressed black man stepping away from an expensive car, triggered something deep and ugly in Miller's mind, an unconscious bias that had been reinforced throughout his career and personal life by the conservative news channels he consumed daily and the problematic rhetoric often exchanged in the break room. Another entitled lawbreaker, he thought to himself, his jaw tightening. Probably some affirmative action higher, thinking he's above the rules. He decided this was worth his attention, a chance to assert his authority in what had otherwise been an uneventful shift. Miller turned on his flashing lights, stopped his patrol car directly behind Marcus's BMW, and stepped out. With deliberate authority, he walked straight toward Marcus, who had already noticed the lights, and turned around. "Hey, what kind of parking job is that?" Miller's voice boomed loudly and rudely across the sidewalk without greeting or professional courtesy. "Don't you think you're blocking the whole damn street?" Marcus was startled by the confrontational tone. He looked back at his car, then at the "Officer, I see the problem, officer," he replied calmly, though he was taken aback by the aggressive approach. "I apologize for not parking perfectly. I was just going to be a few minutes, but I can move it right now if you'd prefer." Marcus was willing to cooperate and correct the minor issue, but Miller didn't seem interested in an easy resolution. He waved off Marcus's offer with visible contempt. "Oh, now you want to fix it?" he said with a mocking tone. "A bit late for that. Don't you think must be nice just parking wherever you feel like it? Give me your license and registration now." His tone commanding and deliberately intimidating, despite being extremely upset by Officer Miller's unprofessional and disrespectful behavior, Marcus remained composed. He knew from both personal and professional experience that arguing with an agitated police officer on the street was potentially dangerous. He calmly reached for his wallet, removing his driver's license, and then reached into his glove compartment for the vehicle registration, handing both to Miller without comment. Miller snatched the documents from Marcus's hand, glanced at the name and photo on the license, then looked Marcus up and down with obvious skepticism, his eyes lingering on the expensive suit and watch. "Marcus Daniels," he read aloud, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Driving a BMW and dressed like you own the place must be nice," he said, making no attempt to hide his assumptions and prejudices. "I bet you think the rules don't apply to you, huh?" Marcus took a deep breath, feeling his heart rate increasing. With every demeaning comment, he decided to respond clearly, but without escalating. "Officer Miller," he said, reading the nameplate on the uniform, "I understand I made a parking error, and I've offered to correct it immediately. I'd appreciate professional courtesy in return. Your comments are inappropriate and unnecessary." This measured response seemed to anger Miller even more. The fact that this black man would dare to lecture him on professionalism struck a nerve. Inappropriate? Miller's voice rose several decibels. You know what's inappropriate. People like you thinking you're above. The law, I'm the one who decides what's appropriate here, understand? By now, several pedestrians had slowed their pace, watching the interaction with concern and curiosity. Marcus noticed the growing audience and felt a mixture of humiliation and anger, but maintained his composure. Officer, I've cooperated fully and acknowledged my mistake. There's no need for this confrontation. I'd like to either move my car or receive my citation so we can both continue with our evenings. Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you? Miller sneered, moving closer to Marcus, invading his personal space. You don't get to decide how this goes, I do, and right now I think you've got an attitude problem. Miller's face had reddened, his hand, moving, to rest on his belt near his handcuffs. I'm starting to think you might be intoxicated the way you parked that car, and now giving me this backtalk. Marcus immediately recognized the dangerous escalation happening before him. Officer, I am completely sober and have been nothing but cooperative. I must insist that you maintain professional conduct. His voice remained steady, though his muscles tensed with the growing threat. Your current behavior and language could be construed as harassment. That was the final straw for Miller, being called out by a black man in front of growing audience. Harassment? He shouted. You want to see harassment? In a swift motion, Miller grabbed Marcus's arm, twisting it behind his back. You're resisting arrest, he announced loudly, though Marcus had done nothing of the sort. What are you doing? Marcus asked in shock, attempting to maintain his balance without pulling away, which could be seen as resistance. This is completely uncalled for. I've done nothing wrong. Miller ignored him, pulling his handcuffs from his belt and roughly securing them around Marcus's wrists, deliberately tightening them to the point of pain. Let's see how that fancy suit looks in the back of my patrol car, he muttered with satisfaction. Maybe this will teach you some respect for the law. The humiliation was overwhelming. Marcus Daniels, a federal judge, being handcuffed on a public street for a minor parking violation while being subjected to racially charged comments. He looked around, seeing phones being raised recording the incident as he was marched toward the patrol car, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. As Miller opened the rear door of the patrol car, preparing to force Marcus inside, another police vehicle suddenly pulled up behind them, lights flashing. Chief Vanessa Rodriguez stepped out of the vehicle, her expression one of confusion and concern. Miller, what's going on here? She called out. Walking briskly toward them, Chief Rodriguez, a Latina woman in her late 40s, had been with the department for over 20 years, rising through the ranks through hard work and a commitment to community policing. She had been driving back to the station when she spotted the commotion. I got a call about a disturbance, she explained, looking from Miller to the handcuffed man. Just dealing with a parking violation and some resistance, ma'am. Miller replied, his voice suddenly professional, though still confident in his actions. Subject became confrontational when asked for identification. Chief Rodriguez looked more closely at the handcuffed man, and her eyes widened in shock. Judge Daniels? She asked in disbelief. What on earth is happening here? Chief Rodriguez, Marcus acknowledged with remarkable composure given the circumstances. I'm afraid Officer Miller and I have had a misunderstanding about my parking and his approach to law enforcement. Judge Daniels. Miller repeated, his face draining of color. As he realized his terrible mistake, the man he had just handcuffed and insulted was federal judge Marcus Daniels, one of the most respected legal minds in the state, someone with tremendous power and influence in the justice system, Officer Miller. "Remove those handcuffs immediately," Chief Rodriguez ordered, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And step back to my vehicle now." Miller fumbled with the keys, his hands suddenly shaking as he unlocked the handcuffs, freeing Marcus, whose wrists showed red marks from the over-tightened restraints. "Judge Daniels, I didn't realize." Miller stammered, his previous arrogance evaporated. "In an instant." "Clearly," Marcus replied, rubbing his wrists, his dignity intact despite the ordeal. "Though I wonder if it would have mattered, Judge Daniels. I cannot begin to apologize enough for this incident," Chief Rodriguez said, her voice sincere and distressed. "Please know, this is not how our department operates, and there will be immediate consequences." Miller stood nearby, his face ashen. "Judge, I'm so sorry. Please, you have to believe me. I didn't know who you were. I would never have." His pleading was pathetic, a complete reversal of his previous intimidation tactics. "That's precisely the problem, Officer Miller," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority that had made him renowned in the courtroom. "Your behavior shouldn't change based on who I am, but rather be consistent with the law and proper procedure for all citizens, regardless of their position or appearance." By now a small crowd had gathered, many with phones recording the exchange. Miller looked around, seeing his career flash before his eyes. "Please, sir, I have a family, a mortgage. I made a mistake, I'm begging you." Marcus straightened his suit jacket, taking a moment to compose himself. "Chief Rodriguez, I'd like to file a formal complaint. Regarding this incident, I'll be at your office tomorrow morning with my statement. I trust there will be body camera footage to review as well." "Yes, sir, of course," Rodriguez nodded. "I'll personally ensure everything is preserved for the investigation." Officer Miller is suspended, effective immediately pending a full review. Miller stood frozen in place, the reality of his situation sinking in his prejudice and abuse of power had just potentially cost him everything he had worked for. "Please, Judge." "Daniels, I'll do anything, make this right. I'm sorry." Marcus looked at him with a mixture of pity and resolve. "Officer Miller, I believe in justice, not vengeance. The appropriate procedures will be followed, and you'll receive a fair hearing, but actions have consequences, and it's time you faced yours." 2 weeks later, Chief Rodriguez sat at her desk, the blinds drawn against the media truck still parked outside the station, her eyes tired from countless hours reviewing the final disciplinary report on Officer Bradley Miller. The internal affairs investigation had been swift and thorough, examining not only the incident with Judge Daniels, but Miller's entire service record. What they found was deeply disturbing and painted a picture of systemic failures. The data analysts had compiled irrefutable evidence showing a pattern of disproportionate stops, detentions, and citations of minorities compared to white citizens, with Miller stopping black drivers at a rate nearly 4 times higher than his colleagues. The investigation uncovered 27 civilian complaints over Miller's 8-year career, most filed by minority citizens, that had been dismissed without proper investigation, buried in administrative processes, or simply ignored by previous supervisors. Body camera footage from previous incidents revealed numerous instances of excessive force, derogatory language, and violations of department policy that had been downplayed, redacted, or excluded from his official record. The investigation also revealed troubling connections between Miller and several other officers who displayed similar patterns of behavior, suggesting an informal network within the department that enabled and protected those who engaged in discriminatory policing. Rodriguez's own leadership was now under scrutiny as well. Why hadn't these patterns been identified sooner? How had Miller's behavior been allowed to continue for so long? The answers were uncomfortable, forcing the department to confront its culture of silence and the unwritten rules that had protected officers like Miller at the expense of the communities they were sworn to serve. The evidence was overwhelming, especially when combined with the body camera footage from the incident with Judge Daniels, which clearly showed Miller's unprovoked escalation, racially charged comments, and complete disregard for proper procedure. The department's disciplinary board had reached a unanimous decision, which now sat before Rodriguez awaiting her final approval. Outside her office, the story had already made national headlines. Federal judge handcuffed for parking while black. Officer begs for mercy. Becoming yet another example in the ongoing conversation about police bias and accountability, Judge Daniels had given one television interview speaking eloquently about the need for systemic reform, while emphasizing that most officers serve with honor and distinction. He had been measured and fair, even in the face of blatant discrimination. Rodriguez signed the final page of the report. Officer Bradley Miller was terminated from the Richmond Police Department, effective immediately. Additionally, his certification as a law enforcement officer would be reviewed by the state board with a recommendation for permanent revocation. The decision was not made lightly, but the evidence demanded nothing less. As a separate matter, the district attorney's office was reviewing the case for possible criminal charges of false imprisonment and civil rights violations. Though Judge Daniels had made it clear he was more interested in systemic change than personal retribution, he had already announced the formation of a new community oversight committee that would work with the police department to improve training procedures and accountability. For Marcus Daniels, the incident had been both humiliating and enlightening. While he had always been aware of racial bias in law enforcement, experiencing it so directly, despite his position of authority, had reinforced his commitment to using his platform for positive change. He had received thousands of messages from people sharing similar experiences, though without his resources or position to seek justice. The following month, Judge Daniels stood at a podium in the largest auditorium in the city, looking out at a sea of faces representing every neighborhood and demographic in Richmond. The Community Forum on Police Reform had been his initiative, bringing together Chief Rodriguez City Council members, state legislators, civil rights attorneys, community organizers, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens who had experienced police misconduct. The air was thick with tension and expectation. Some attendees skeptical that anything would change, others cautiously hopeful that this incident involving a man of Daniel's stature might finally catalyze meaningful reform. Judge Daniels had spent weeks preparing for this moment, consulting experts, reviewing successful police reform initiatives from around the country, and reflecting deeply on his own experience. The dialogue that unfolded over the 4-hour session was difficult, but necessary, focusing on concrete actions rather than blame or recrimination. The forum addressed uncomfortable realities about racial disparities in policing, the barriers to accountability, and the psychological impact of discriminatory enforcement on communities of color. What happened to me was not isolated. Judge Daniels told the packed auditorium, his voice steady and resonant. The data is clear and irrefutable that black and brown citizens experience a different standard of policing, but neither is this universal behavior. We must address the systemic issues while supporting the many officers who serve with honor and fairness, who risk their lives daily to protect our communities. It's not enough to remove individual bad actors like Officer Miller, though that is necessary. We must change the culture and systems that enable them to operate unchecked for years. We need robust civilian oversight, transparent disciplinary processes, mandatory bias training, and a complete reimagining of how we measure successful policing. The judge paused, looking around the room. The measure of good policing cannot be the number of arrests or citations, but rather the safety, health, and trust of the community. Most importantly, we need police departments that reflect the diversity of the communities. They serve and leadership that holds everyone accountable to the same standard regardless of their position or status. Officer Miller, meanwhile, had lost everything: his job, his reputation, his future in law enforcement. His personal life collapsed in parallel with his professional downfall, his few remaining friends distancing themselves as the body camera footage went viral, showing the world exactly who Bradley Miller was beneath the badge and uniform. He found himself unable to secure employment, his name forever linked to the viral videos of his disgrace. Legal bills mounted as civil rights attorneys filed. Lawsuits on behalf of previous victims who had come forward after seeing Judge Daniels speak out. While many argued he had received precisely what he deserved, a justifiable consequence for years of abuse and discrimination, others in the community, particularly other officers and police reform advocates, pointed to the lack of proper training, regular psychological evaluation, and meaningful supervision that had allowed his biases to fester and grow unchecked for nearly a decade. Some critics questioned why it took mistreating a federal judge to finally hold Miller accountable when dozens of ordinary citizens had filed complaints documenting similar treatment. Without result, Miller's fall from grace prompted difficult questions about who policing truly protects and serves, raising uncomfortable discussions about the invisible hierarchy of citizenship that determines whose complaints are taken seriously. He had become both a cautionary tale for other officers and a symbol of a broken system that failed not only the communities being policed, but sometimes the officers themselves by not addressing problematic behavior.